One of the most important agri-commodity sectors in India is the sugar industry. We are today the second largest sugar producer in the world, and in addition to export revenue, our own food security, the sector also impacts the livelihood of about 5 crore farmers and provides direct employment to more than 5 lakh workers in sugar mills all around the country. In this video, we'll examine the sugar business in greater detail, and by the end of this presentation, you should have a sufficient idea on how to identify a fundamentally strong sugar company from a weaker one. If you like this video, then do give it a nice, big, sweet thumbs up. And if you have friends interested in investing, then do share it on those WhatsApp groups. Let's begin. The sugar industry in India has strong political linkages and is extremely regulated from top to bottom. I'm not mincing words here when I say the sugar companies have no control over most aspects of the business. For instance, sugar mills in India are not allowed to own sugarcane fields and therefore have to always rely on farmers for the raw material. In fact, mills cannot even buy sugarcane from any farmer they want because each mill is allotted a particular area called the command area, and they have to buy sugarcane from farmers operating within that area only. If that's not enough, the sugar companies are mandated to source the entire sugarcane crop that's grown by farmers, irrespective of the market demand for sugar or the amount of inventory that's already lying in the mill. So if you look at the dynamics of it, the sugar companies don't have much control over their raw material, they don't control the quantity of sugar produced, and it's not wrong to say that the sugarcane farmers have a decent amount of bargaining power. Secondly, the price of sugarcane is almost completely in the hands of the government. So there are two methods of pricing sugarcane. SAP, which is state advised price, and then there is the FRP, which stands for fair and remunerative price. Now, different states in India use either of these two methods, but the fact is the sugar mills in India are simply price takers, and the price itself is determined by political considerations rather than market economics. Number three, the sugar companies don't even have control over the quantity of sugar they can sell in the market. You see, the mills have to follow a monthly release mechanism wherein the government informs each mill the amount of sugar it can sell in the market in a particular month. This was not always the case, and in 2013, the government had abolished the monthly release mechanism, but then the MRM was reintroduced in 2018, presumably under some political influence. And finally, there is the selling price of sugar, and guess what? The sugar companies have no control over that as well. The fact is, sugar is a commodity, and just like what we saw with cement in a previous video, the product of one mill can be easily substituted for another. As a consequence, a sugar mill cannot charge a price significantly higher than its peers. And while some companies have introduced premium branded sugar, almost 60% of the consumption comes from large institutional buyers like sweet manufacturers or soft drink companies who are never going to pay a premium for it. In other words, sugar companies lack pricing power over their customers, and since they still have to pay a fixed price for sugarcane, it leads to a decent amount of volatility in the sugar company's operating margin, leading to other complications. For instance, when there is overproduction, the price of sugar declines, which negatively impacts the financial position of the sugar companies. This in turn makes it difficult for them to pay the sugarcane farmers for their purchase, and everyone loses in the process. So to help out all parties, the government in 2018 implemented a minimum support price or MSP for sugar, and now sugar mills cannot sell their produce below the MSP, which offers them some protection. But net, this section would have sufficiently convinced you that sugar companies don't have any control over the production and price of sugarcane, and likewise they don't have much sway over the quantity or selling price of sugar. The sugar industry is very cyclical, with the price of sugar swinging by over 50% at different points in time. Now, Economics 101 says the price of any commodity is a function of its demand and its supply. Since sugar is an essential commodity and is consumed by almost every household, the demand for sugar is almost always stable. Which means these cycles we see are entirely on account of the supply side, that is the fluctuation in the production of sugar. So here's how this works. When the production is high, it leads to a sugar surplus and therefore lower prices. This reduces the profitability of sugar companies, which leads to a delay in payments to farmers who consequently shift from sugarcane to other crops. This means there is lower sugarcane acreage and therefore there's less sugar production, which leads to a sugar shortfall. This again pushes up the price of sugar, which improves the profitability of sugar companies. They start making timely payments to farmers who then increase the acreage of sugarcane, and this pattern continues repeatedly, often known as the sugar cycle. Now, a typical sugar cycle runs over a 4 to 6 period, and an understanding of when it starts, when it peaks, and when it recedes can be very useful for us as investors. In addition to over and underproduction, the sugar industry has to also take into account external factors like monsoon, which can affect the production, crushing, transportation, and the sugar recovery levels. While setting up a sugar mill requires a significant amount of upfront money, it's actually the working capital, the money that's needed for the day-to-day operations, that determines the financial well-being of a sugar company. You see, sugarcane as a crop is available only in the November to April period, which means a lot of the expenses like paying the farmers, the crushing, the harvesting, the transportation, etc. happens during this tight window, which puts a strain on the company's financial resources. On the other hand, since the demand for sugar is throughout the year, every sugar mill has to keep an inventory of 4 to 6 months. So the working capital requirements for a sugar mill are huge, which not only stresses them operationally, but it also puts a lot of strategic strain on them. What do I mean by strategic strain? Well, look at it this way. As a sugar company, you want to grow the business, but when you have so many things to think about, there's a fine line you're treading, and even the slightest miscalculation can lead to a liquidity crunch or even bankruptcy. In fact, bankruptcy is very common in this industry, which is why sugar companies are very careful with their expansion plans, and most of them have a decent amount of short-term borrowings for their working capital requirements. Like any commodity business, a sugar company needs to operate at a high level of efficiency to survive and thrive in this industry. Now, because the price of the raw material, that is the sugarcane, and the price of sugar is both regulated, the most important factor of competitiveness for any sugar company is the lowering of its cost of production. Which brings us to the size of operations, and being big and large has a lot of advantages. Firstly, the larger mills enjoy the benefits of economies of scale, which helps them bring down their per unit production cost. Secondly, they can now negotiate better terms with regulators, with farmers, and the institutional buyers of sugar. Because of their better financial strength, these large companies are able to secure working capital at a lower rate of interest, thereby improving their return from operations. And finally, during down cycles, it helps being the lion in a jungle, because then the bigger sugar mills can acquire the weaker ones, which not only improves their market share but also makes their operations a lot more cost efficient. A second significant factor when it comes to lowering the cost of production is the location of the sugar mill. You see, sugar mills can make sugar only during the crushing season, which means areas which have a longer crushing season offers a cost advantage, as it enables the better utilization of fixed assets. Now, the southern parts of India have a longer crushing season, which is on account of a favorable climate, which stays relatively stable throughout the year with moderate amounts of rainfall. It also helps that the southern states have a well-developed irrigation system, which allows sugarcane cultivation for extended periods of time, and the farmers there are known to be using modern farming techniques, which helps maximize yields and improves the quality of sugar. This access to high-yielding cane varieties puts South India-based sugar companies, especially the ones in Karnataka and Maharashtra, at an advantageous position, as they can now receive higher recovery rates, which leads to better operating efficiency. And finally, sugar has to be transported, and therefore the proximity of a factory to high-yielding sugarcane farms and to the ports massively brings down the freight cost, which results in a lower cost of production. An integrated sugar mill is a large-scale facility that's designed to not just transform the raw sugarcane into refined sugar, but it's also capable of producing other products like molasses, bagasse, and ethanol. Over the last decade or so, the Indian sugar industry has taken forward integration quite seriously, and the government policies have been very supportive of it. In fact, integration has 4 major benefits. Firstly, it helps the sugar mills earn a higher income from their operations. Secondly, it helps these companies diversify their product portfolio. The per unit profit contribution of these byproducts is actually higher than what the sugar mills earn on a unit of sugar. And importantly, unlike sugar, products like ethanol or molasses do not face the same level of cyclicity. Actually, let me read out a line that was written in a report by ICRA, which is of relevance here. While revenues from byproducts on an average account for 20 to 25% of the total revenues for large sugar mills, the percentage contribution from byproducts to the total operating profit is much higher. So to put this together, integrated sugar mills not only reduce the level of business risk, but there is a lot more stability in the revenue, which is something we investors should recognize and appreciate when evaluating the sugar industry. If you're getting good value from this video, then please do give this video a thumbs up. And if you aren't a subscriber yet, then do consider becoming one, as I can then serve you videos as soon as they are released and also share with you some investing strategies, tips and stories that I continually post in the community section. Alright, we now come to the part where we look at some ratios and parameters to assess the business performance of different sugar companies. The first ratio is the operating profit or EBITDA per ton of cane crushed. It's a commonly used metric within the industry, and it's used to assess the profitability and operational efficiency of sugar companies. For instance, we can see how different companies are stacked up, and although this data might seem a little erratic at times, it does help in not only evaluating the companies but in also assessing the overall health of the sugar industry. Of course, I must mention this data should not be looked in isolation, and one should also compare it with the amount of cane crushed, because that's a number that can swing wildly, like what happened in FY22 with Balrampur Chini and Sri Renuka Sugars. The next important metric to study is the capacity utilization ratio, which explains if the sugar company has sufficient access to its primary raw material, that is sugarcane. The reason why this is an important number is because if you recall from what I had said earlier, sugar companies cannot source sugarcane from outside their command area. So they have to make do with what they have, and therefore knowing the capacity utilization ratio is absolutely crucial. Now, truth be told, I found it a little difficult to gather this number, but on a conceptual level, sugar companies should strive for a healthy ratio, and this generally happens when the sugar company maintains a good relationship with the farmers in terms of helping them improve yields, their social responsibilities, and of course, the timely clearance of sugarcane dues. The next ratio that's often examined in the context of sugar companies is the return on capital employed. And we have seen a lot of videos on my channel to know that the higher this ROC number, the better it is. Now, sugar companies generally stay within an ROC range of 12 to 16%, but given the cyclical nature of the industry, this number does go visibly up and down. For instance, Triveni Engineering has seen some wild swings with the ROC going as high as 21% last year and as low as -2% a few years back. And perhaps that's why in the case of sugar companies, it's generally suggested that one looks at the return on capital employed along with the EBITDA margins. So if you find a scenario where the EBITDA margin is similar or even better than the industry average, but the ROC is low, then one needs to analyze the reasons for the same, which in most cases would point to a low fixed asset turnover or a working capital cycle that's longer than the industry average. In terms of valuation, the metric that's most commonly used when comparing different sugar companies is the EV upon EBITDA, which is the enterprise value divided by the operating profit. Now, generally, all commodity businesses are evaluated per this EV on EBITDA ratio, and while we can all understand where every sugar company stands, one of the better uses of this metric is when it is measured along with the ROC, that is the return on capital employed. In fact, a more visually pleasing way of looking at it is using an XY graph. And what we are really looking for are companies that have a high ROC and a low EV upon EBITDA. Once again, the cyclicity of the sugar industry makes this number a bit fluid, but in my view, looking at it along with the ROC and over a sufficient period of time can give us some predictable patterns. And finally, we have the part on contingent liabilities, which is something that is ignored by most investors, and I hope you don't make that mistake. You see, sugar companies provide guarantees to banks for crop loans taken by farmers as well as for loans taken by transporters and harvesters working in sugarcane procurement. Now, for an investor, it is important to assess the size of these contingent liabilities, because if the farmer or transporter cannot repay these loans, then the repayment responsibility lies on the sugar company. So if the amount of contingent liability is large, let's say it's more than 20% of the cash flow from operations or the net worth of the company, then investors should be super cautious and try to extract some answers from the company's management. Alright, so let's recap. So we started with an understanding of the sugar business, which we know is regulated in every possible way. The business is cyclical and it's also very capital intensive. We then understood the importance of keeping production costs low, which is a lot easier for large size companies and mills that have a locational advantage. We looked at the growing popularity of integrated sugar mills and consequently the potential decline of standalone mills. Next up were the efficiency metrics, and we examined the operating profit per ton and the capacity utilization ratio. In terms of valuations, we looked at the return on capital employed and the EV on EBITDA and a graphical representation of both these metrics. And we closed this analysis with a view on contingent liability. Personally, I really love the sugar industry as it presents an opportunity to make multi-bagger returns if you can back the right horse at the right time. I sincerely hope you found the information I presented today useful and that you will be able to build your own analysis on top of it. Once again, I thank you for your time. Do like this video, share it with your friends, and I'll see you 3 days from now. Until then.